Afternoon. I am delighted to see you all and grateful that you have joined us. I want first to make a landed acknowledgement to begin our event. UCI is located on the homelands of the Akhamen and Tongva peoples, who in the face of ongoing settler colonialism continue to claim their place and act as stewards of their ancestral lands. And we're grateful to be guests on these lands. I also want to share that this event is being recorded and may be made available on the Center for Medical Humanities website in the near future. Hi, my name is Jim Lee, and I'm the center's director. I want to thank the deans of the Schools of Medicine, Humanities, and the Claire Trevor School of the Arts for their support of the center, as well as members of the community whose support has been so critical and uplifting. I also want to thank the center staff for their excellent work in making today's and all of our events possible. Eku Arhin and Amanda Swain. Thank you for joining us for this first event of the academic year. Before I turn this over to our three editors, I want to invite you to join us for our next event. This Thursday, October 13th, at 5 o'clock, over Zoom, we will enjoy a presentation by the eminent medical sociologist, Arthur Frank, who will reflect on his classic work, The Wounded Storyteller, and how wounded storytellers need to be vulnerable readers. I just put this event in the chat, so if you're interested, you may register for it if you'd like to join us again this week. Now let me turn to this event by introducing the three editors of this wonderful collection of poems in the volume titled Dr. Poets and Other Healers. Thelma T. Reyna's poetry, short fiction, and nonfiction have collectively won 20 national and international book awards. She has written 6 books, a short story collection, 2 poetry chapbooks, 2 full-length poetry collections, and a memoir in poetry. She was Poet Laureate in Altadena, California, in 2014 to 2016. She has also edited 3 award-winning anthologies, including When the Virus Came Calling, COVID-19 Strikes America, written by 46 distinguished authors from across the US, depicting the first year of the pandemic in real time. Dr. Poets and Other Healers, co-edited with Dr. Maskins and Dr. Shapiro, received a gold medal for poetry anthology in a recent international competition. Dr. Frank Maskins is Distinguished Professor Emeritus and Founding Director of the Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of California Irvine School of Medicine. Since 2001, he has helped develop the field of end-of-life medicine and is also internationally known for his column in Oncology Times titled Poetry for Cancer Caregivers. He's published 2 books of poetry, Aching for Tomorrow and Believing in Today. Since 2018, he has been co-founder and co-coordinator of the annual Symposium on Healing and Hope series hosted by UCI, which continued with the 5th annual symposium held this past February 2022. Finally, Johanna Shapiro is Professor Emerita of Family Medicine and Founder Director of the Program in Medical Humanities and Arts at the University of California Irvine School of Medicine. She is the recipient of numerous UCI teaching awards, including the Outstanding Faculty Achievement Award. Her book, The Inner World of Medical Students Listening to Their Voices in Poetry, focuses on professional identity formation and medical education as revealed in students' creative writing. She is widely published in poetry and medical humanities. She is also the co-founder and co-coordinator of the annual Symposium on Healing and Hope series hosted by UCI. All 3 of them will be introducing the other writers featured in the book who are joining us this evening. Thank you all for giving so generously of your time and talent. And before I turn this over to Thelma, I'm going to go ahead and post into our chat ways to purchase this book so that as you are inspired by what you hear tonight, you'll want to read more. So I turn this over to Thelma.
Thelma, can you unmute? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me okay now? Okay, good evening. Welcome to everyone. Thank you all for being here. And I just wanted to say I'm a big supporter of indie bookstores. And if you like to buy your books at indie bookstores, go to your favorite one and just ask them to order this book and they will do it for you. The fastest way is to just go to our press, which is Golden Foothills with an S at the end, goldenfoothillspress.com. and you can order it there, and it will be shipped to you expeditiously. Another way is to get it on Amazon.com. Just type in the title of the book and it'll take you there. And there are various payment methods as well. And that involve PayPal, traditional check, our address is on the website, or you can also do Venmo. And feel free to contact me at the website with any questions that you have. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thelma, are you finished? Are you going to say a few more things about the backstory?
Oh, okay. So we're in part 2 already. Absolutely. Let's talk about the backstory of this book. Some people wonder, well, how come you got 2 great professional medical people here, Dr. Shapiro and Dr. Maskins, and then you have someone who knows nothing about medicine, me, as part of the mix. Well, we got together, we got to know each other a couple of years ago. Johanna and Frank were they were planning their wonderful annual symposium, Poetry for Hope and Healing. And that particular year, a couple of years back, if I remember right, they were looking for a woman poet to be the keynote speaker. They specifically wanted a Latina poet. And it seems that I was recommended to them. They approached me and I gladly said yes. And I was their keynote speaker a couple of years back. Such began our collaboration. For this current year, 2023, I co-coordinated the annual symposium in February with them, even though they did all the hard work. And it's going to continue on with Dr. Maskins and another collaborator. So as we were preparing for the symposium in February, we realized that the process of soliciting writings from medical professionals, which was part of what the symposium was going to be based on, because it features writings by medical professionals and others interested in that, we realized that we could actually turn it into a book, because an anthology on this topic of medical professionals speaking to us about their experiences with COVID, their feelings, their fears, their hopes, what it was like to be on the front lines, was a book that would be very, very vital to our society. And so we decided to go ahead and combine the 2 endeavors, preparing for the symposium, as well as collecting these writings and preparing them to be turned into a book. And that is what happened. So here we are, and I, for one, am very thankful and very glad that we had that opportunity to collaborate and to produce this book for our society. So thank you, Johanna. And I'd like to ask Johanna to tell us a little bit more about the backstory, and then Frank is going to tell us a little bit more about the backstory, and we'll all know exactly how all the pieces fell together.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Selma. And Thelma asked me to just say a few words about how we actually went about obtaining submissions. So our main goal was to recruit as broadly as possible from a range of healthcare practitioners, mostly in California. And we wanted to attract not only physician writers, whom Dr. Maskins and I knew quite a few, but also nurses, medical students, psychologists, holistic health practitioners, and also private care facility workers. So to achieve this vision, we did send out a call for submissions to individuals and groups that we thought might be interested. We used our personal contacts and word of mouth. And in the end, about half of our authors are physicians. But we also think we ended up with an impressively diverse field of healers, because certainly this pandemic required not only doctors, but healers of all varieties. Even the physicians themselves in the anthology represent many different specialties, and they often had very different experiences during the pandemic. Some of those represented in the anthology identify as poets. Others merely wanted to give voice to their very intense stories. in any case, at least for me, it is the breadth and depth of viewpoints that make this collection so rich and ultimately so moving. And Frank, I'm going to give you the ball.
Well, I come in from a totally different point of view, although Joanna and I had been sponsors and developers of the Healing and Hope effort. What really got me involved in this way was that on December 6, 2019, I had an unexpected cardiac bypass operation that was very complicated and lasted 46 days. And when I woke up, my new cardiologist talked to me and she said, you know, we need to test you for COVID. Well, I didn't have any idea what COVID was. And both because most people had not by that time. However, she followed me very carefully, and it was very slow recovery because of all the COVID restrictions in which we were. And in fact, finally, my brother suggested that I write or dictate my memoirs, and that might get my brain going again because it had largely stopped. And my physical being had also stopped. And the cardiac rehab facility didn't open until that summer. So then miraculously, my brain began to improve. And in the December of 2020, 1 year later, as so often happens with me when I write poetry, between Christmas and New Year's, I wrote about 20 poems, including the 2 that you will hear from me this evening. What this experience taught me a lot about was human beings, although I'd always knew, physicians as doctors and physicians as patients. Really having a life-threatening event really made me think about a lot of things differently. And I was very impressed by the people who had visited me during this time, including some of my severe critics, and the hope and the healing that they produced by the individual interactions. So it seemed like me, and I pushed very hard on the holistic aspect because in my laboratory, I had a very large group of Buddhists, and they really got me very, very involved. And so I'm a believer now in spirituality when I used to be an atheist. So without further ado, I will move to my poems. And what I should say is I wrote a bunch of poems, but the first is very, very pessimistic, short, and the second is very optimistic. So without further ado, the pessimistic one. The Newspeak mask. Now your mask protects me from death transmitted in the air. Eyes playing hide and seek with emotions. Tonal melodies communicating the mood of the moment. No touching in this new world. Hugs condemned to virtuality. We become muggers of empathy, obliterating kindness and compassion. Now my mask shields me from digital algorithms on the hunt, searching for identities to condemn each one of us as we enter an Orwellian tomorrow. And take a deep breath, and we will go to the more optimistic poem called Connections. Hugging, a universal gesture when done well, like holding hands with your whole body. When done with malintent, like a punch to the gut. There is an infinite variety of hugs. There is the business hug, brief arm contact around one's shoulder, a greeting familiar to all, saying, I'm here, but nothing more. There is the faithful colleague hug, arms encircling each other, bodies facing apart, and accompanied by a smile and a brief meeting of the eyes. And then the good friend hug, a brief contact of bodies with a felt response, a peck on the cheek, a slow parting of the flesh. And unexpectedly, moments that we all remember, two bodies entangled from head to toe, leaving nothing to the imagination. And hands, two people gently holding hands while walking down the street. The caregiver softly touching the hand of a patient or a loved one, signaling kindness and love, building empathy and trust. Hugging and holding hands, two ancient forms of communication, transmitting compassion and understanding, keeping the peace, leading to healing and hope, nurturing, fostering, connecting, the chance for another day. I think, do we go?
That's beautiful. Yes. And,
Thank
I just want to, I put something in the chat, but I just wanted to remind everyone that if you have, we do have a Q&A at the end of this session. But if you have comments or questions, and I see some people are already doing this, but please put them into the chat. We have a lot of readers, and so we don't want you to lose sight of your initial reactions to some of the earlier readings. So thank you very much. So I usually write poetry, but this is actually a prose piece that I wrote. It's called Emerging During the Pandemic. For the first 7 or 8 months of quarantine during the coronavirus pandemic, I went virtually nowhere other than to visit my doctors and my dentist. My only walking was around our neighborhood. At the end of our street, which is long and meandering, there is a dead end that provides a beautiful vista of hills and vast uncluttered sky. When I reached this point, I raised my arms wide and uttered the following prayer: protect your servants, help your people, save your world. And parenthetically, since over the course of history, the Lord's servants have been a motley crew, I clarify that at that point in time, when I talked about protecting one's servants, I was referring to the essential workers and frontline doctors and nurses battling COVID-19. I said these words 3 times, each time separated by a respectful pause, which was inevitably met with silence, but it might have been a divine silence, which could be full of answers. Who knows what anything really means these days? Then I turned around and went home. I was able to indulge this practice usually in complete isolation because although there are houses nearby, their inhabitants never emerged. One day, however, a middle-aged guy materialized, about to get into his car. He stood gawking at me like I was a crazy woman. I don't know how he got that idea. He seemed to want to just drive away, but was probably worried I might attack his house or more likely curse it. Anyway, he shouted out, "What are you doing there?" I replied, "Praying." It took him a moment to process this. No church in sight, not even a synagogue, no choir, no prayer books, and as far as either of us could tell, no God. In any event, after a quizzical in-breath, he nodded and said quite graciously, "Oh, well then, that's all right. Go right ahead." I waved in a friendly manner, finished my final round of supplications, and walked home. Prayer never felt so neighborly. Or maybe neighborliness never felt so prayerful. Who knows what anything really means these days? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johanna. And so for our authors, as has been mentioned before, the 3 of us, Johanna, Frank, and I will take turns introducing different authors. So next up is Carol J. Grabowski, and I am the fortunate person who gets to introduce Carol to you. Carol J. Grabowski, MD, MBA, received her degree from Temple University Medical School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She is an OBGYN who has been in practice at Long Beach Memorial since 1985. Until 2013, she was also in private practice providing full OBGYN services, including robotic, minimally invasive surgery. As Director of Women's Health Services at the Children's Clinic, she expanded their OBGYN for underinsured and uninsured women in Long Beach. Caring for this multicultural population has required communicating in as many as 4 languages in one day. She regularly engages in group education and public forums. So without further ado, Carol Grabowski.
Carol, can you unmute? Carol, we can't hear you. Unmute, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right, sorry about that. I'm here in Hawaii at the National Botanical Gardens. I thought I'd share it with you as I read. Lucky me. I wrote this around in 2020, and so it seems a bit dated, but let's go with that. COVID can't stop me. And I thought the Zika epidemic was bad. Testing, counseling, restricting travel, but all that was nothing compared to COVID-19. In April 2020, when COVID first hit our nation hard, I was out of the fray. I felt like a soldier observing a war rather than being down in the trenches fighting it. I'm a 67-year-old OBGYN in Southern California. There had been a decreased workload at our clinic when COVID outbreaks caused routine care to be put on hold. And I left the clinic so my nurse practitioner colleague could keep working. I decided then to volunteer with the Medical Reserve Corps. I was assigned to the COVID screening tent in full PPE and sanitizer in ample supply. I vetted people who suspected they were infected. Indeed, many were, but they were all able to go home. It felt good to be part of a national effort, all of us working together. Other dedicated volunteers, including a retired aerospace engineer who oversaw sanitation of our workplace, and several National Guard corpsmen. I believe that we volunteers were reducing the medical staff's workloads. 4 months later, in August, after I had enjoyed lazy mornings in bed, reading, sipping my coffee, reacquainting myself with my house, planning a remodel, COVID surged. I felt sure I was not ready to retire, so I returned.
Sorry, Carol, you're muted again. Thanks.
Okay, again. Let's go to, I felt sure I was not ready to retire, so I returned to part-time work. I felt extreme concern for my medical colleagues of all fields being overwhelmed with the increase in infected patients. I worked from home for 3.5 days a week, conducting telemedicine and a half day per week in the clinic. A turning point came during 3 days in November when I returned more fully to the clinic as a substitute for the nurse practitioner. Patients were all screened at the door. Nobody seemed symptomatic. However, I developed a headache, nausea, chills. I regurgitated at home, and then I felt better. I felt shaky throughout my body and felt extra anxious. Unsurprisingly, the pandemic was surging as expected in the winter months. My oxygen saturation was normal, but my pulse was rapid at rest as I worked at home. I wore a sweatshirt around the house, a rarity while dealing with menopausal hot flashes. I worried that I was infected and might die. As soon as I could, I got tested. 3 days later, my test results came back positive. I tried to get monoclonal antibodies, but my hospital wasn't set up for these infusions at that time. Fortunately, however, my symptoms remained mild and my appetite and sense of smell soon returned. It was a tremendous relief to learn that by day 6, COVID symptoms in most people have peaked, as was true in my case. I was grateful that I never went to ICU or needed a ventilator. But then I remained cautious, foregoing my spontaneous weekend outings and still masking in indoor places. I consciously focus on what I can do rather than what I cannot do, kind of like PTSD. Back in the clinic full time now, I'm trying my best to convince our patients to get vaccinated against COVID. We long ago realized that logical explanations for vaccines have been given ad infinitum and that we must move beyond that stage. Now we focus on making direct, personal, heartfelt appeals to patients, hoping to influence them emotionally. Sadly, but unavoidably, I have progressed from feeling frustrated to being furiously angry with those who refuse vaccines. I constantly seek suggestions from other providers who are also trying their best to get patients vaccinated. This is a fight, a mission we cannot abandon. I give myself a star for every successful sales pitch that closes the deal with the jab. Thank you. Mahalo.
Thank you so much, Carol. Next up, we have Alexandra M. Levine. And again, I am pleased to be the one introducing her. Alexandra M. Levine, MD, MACP, received her MD from USC. She is a professor at the City of Hope National Medical Center and was Chief Medical Officer from 2007 to 2017. Her many honors and titles include Distinguished Professor of Medicine at USC, the Medical Director of the USC Norris Cancer Hospital, a Master of the American College of Physicians in 2009. She is a nationally and internationally recognized authority on malignancies associated with HIV and worked with Jonas Salk on the development and testing of a therapeutic AIDS vaccine. Alexandra was appointed by President Clinton in 1995 to the Presidential HIV/AIDS Advisory Council. She has published 325 scientific articles, 65 book chapters, and has edited 2 books. Without further ado, welcome to Alexandra.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone spending the time. Early in March of 2020, I got COVID, and it was a very difficult time. It was long. I was sick for a long, long time. In the middle, I wrote this particular poem. I was not able to join my writers group at that time. I was too sick to do the Zoom. I couldn't do anything. And this was the first time I picked up my computer and sat at my desk. So it may not be the best, but it was where my heart was at that time. It's called Friendship as Practiced by Jean. The COVID came on strong and stayed a long while, more than 5 weeks already. No appetite, but that didn't matter. Couldn't get out of bed, let alone cook. Then came Jean, bringing homemade soups, vegetable, bean, onion, minestrone with meatballs. Her daughter made gallons of bone broth, 10 grams of protein in every cup, she said. Then home-baked coffee cakes, banana, apple, and cinnamon pecan, followed by spaghetti with sauce and more meatballs, bags of potatoes and oranges, crackers and breads, and so much more. Driving up to the top of our driveway, placing her boxes on the concrete, turning and walking away. After mutual blowing of kisses and hugs, given across the window glass, she back to her kitchen, me back to my bed. Friendship expressed in this way, suffused with love and care. How lucky I am. I am alive.
Now, Frank will be introducing Chalat Rajaram.
Yes, and I do with great pleasure and very much appreciate his work in our community. He's an MD, FACP, and about 7 other announcements after that, which I will not say. He's been practicing internal medicine in Orange County for the past 30 years. He became the medical director of Vitas Healthcare from 2008 to 2001 and has been serving as medical director at Newport Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, Newport Beach, since 2004. He is certified by the Hospice Medical Directors Certification Board, is a fellow of the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine, is board certified in internal medicine, and is a fellow of the American College of Physicians. His interest in geriatric medicine grew in his office practice and led in the care of elder patients in nursing and rehabilitation facilities. He was awarded the wonderful 2008 Meals on Wheels Orange County Physician of the Year honor. Dr. Haram.
That is a lot, Frank. I didn't need all that. This is a wonderful healing evening, and 2 years ago we were at a different stage. I'm so happy that we have smiling faces, and I need to give a shout out to all my medical school friends from the Caribbean, from Alain, from India, and one is traveling here in Minneapolis. They all joined us, and what a blessing. And my 2 sisters were always my fans, and their families, and my brother-in-law from New Jersey, my friends from Long Beach, from Oceanside, and my neighbor from Tustin. I met him this morning running, and I said, "Hey, you want to listen to some poetry?" So here he is. So anyway, I'll go straight to the 2 poems. I'm reading on, the first poem is Minneapolis Burning. This was on May 30th, and I wrote it in one sitting. And that was also the day when the SpaceX rocket took off in the evening. So I wrote it around 12:45 in the afternoon. Minneapolis Burning. Knee on neck as life leaves, pleading yet the cry unheard, striking at the core of beliefs of human dignity lost as feared. Too slow to call out injustice, people taking to the street at such a moment, this pandemic, the stopping of a heartbeat. Pleas in Navajo, Spanish, English, tears and grief, this gnawing deep. Wherefore we headed? Is there a wish? Is there a soul? Why can't we weep? The launch of Dragon rocket today brings pride and joyful celebration. US built launched this end of May, a smile amidst this deep depression. Over 100,000 dead this year, the country reeling, far from healing, impatience bursting, hard to bear, as Minnesota, Minneapolis is burning. My second poem is Blessing. This was written, there are 4 stanzas. Each stanza was written at a different timeline. The first stanza was on April 8th. The second stanza was on May 5th of 2020. Third stanza was May 6th of 2021. And the final stanza was June 12th of 2021. Blessing. A fresh hope, a bright new day. Prayers last night for family and friend. Feel so blessed waking today. But when will these COVID times end? Then the roses burst from buds in front garden and the backyard, with sun breaking through the clouds. Time to let go, drop my guard. Hard times have not ended. However, while a lot better here, in India, life seems upended. Prayers for health, easing the fear. Death of millions, grief, sadness, the soul never dies. Never, they say. Prayers, thoughts, faithfulness, efforts to feel deep, to find a way. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this and brought some healing out as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chalat. And now I am very pleased to introduce our next author, Pamela Shea. Pamela Shea was the 9th Poet Laureate of San Lantahunga, California, where she enjoyed, quote, quote, taking poetry to the people, unquote, at many venues around the community, and she did this beautifully. Pamela participated in the Gathering of California's Poets Laureate at McGrody Arts Center, hosted by California State Poet Laureate Dana Gioia in 2018. Pamela's poetry has been published in journals and anthologies across California, including We Are Here Village Poets Anthology, the Altadena Poetry Review Anthology, and the Churita. Her professional life has included medical office work and teaching in the fitness field. Pamela studied at the University of Redlands. So welcome, Pamela Shea.
There we are. Thank you, Thelma. Well, my poem was written back in the late spring of 2021 when things were very unknown about COVID and the pandemic. So this is entitled Life from the Other Side of the Tray. In a crowded emergency room, I am plastered against the back wall. My husband, who usually stands tall, now looks small on the table, pale and barely breathing. I told them I'd been a medical assistant, so they let me stay in the back of the room, which was uncomfortably crowded with personnel, all sensing urgency. Thankfully, on my cell phone, I had a snapshot of our COVID vaccinations, and I made a quick list of his medications before driving him to the nearest hospital. Suddenly, a gleaming tray appears, and I know the instruments the tray holds. Sharp and bold for a clean incision, the doctor's decision has been made to open the obstructed airway. My days of surgical assisting are done, and though procedures intrigued me once, not now. I start to edge my way out to leave the room, for a gloom and fear are starting to seep in. I stop, directly facing the doctor. We exchange a direct and intense look. The narrative of the book changes as he said, "Let's wait a minute." The medicine kicks in and does its job. Breath returns to all in that cramped room. The looming specter of suffocation leaves as sighs of relief sweep grief out the door. Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you. Thanks. So our next reader is someone I know well and have known for a long time, Gabriela Mioto, MD. Gabriela trained in medicine at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec, in family medicine at UC Irvine, and public health at UCLA. Her work as a family physician has focused on community medicine in California and Alaska, as well as humanitarian relief and development work internationally in Latin America and the Balkans, with such groups as Prosecco, UNHCR, and Doctors of the World. She is a family physician at the community clinic TCC Family Health in Long Beach, California. Her poetry has been published in the following anthologies: Plague 2020, COVID-19 Art and Poetry from Around the World, edited by Manaz Badihian, and in Nasty Women and Bad Hombres, a poetry anthology, a book I am definitely wanting to read. And finally, Pop Art, an anthology of Southern California poetry.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I want to thank, first of all the work that the three of you put into producing this book, and just to be here with all my fellow poets. I am deeply grateful for that. The first poem I'd like to read is called Love in the Time of COVID-19, and it is a pantoum. And I wrote it in March of 2020, so at the very start of the epidemic, of the pandemic. I chose a pantoum because I felt I needed something to give like a sense of container to the emotions and to what we were going through in that beginning time. And a pantoum has these repeated lines, A, B, C, D, B, D, E, F, and then you'll hear it in the poem, but I was also trying to think a little bit about what it must have been like to be going through the plague when that pandemic was around. And so all these thoughts came to the surface. Love in the time of COVID-19. Now that you are not allowed to touch me, I want to be sheltered by the language of the birds and a thundering buffalo drum, heart of one who returned from near extinction. I want to be sheltered by the language of the birds while Il Medico de la Peste wears an N95 this time around. And the heart of one who returned from near extinction watches us make green pesto and music for one another. While Il Medico de la Peste wears an N95 this time, not smelling of lavender and mint, but memento mori still, and watches us make green pesto and music for one another, even though potato bins are empty and paper hoarded. Not smelling of lavender and mint, but still memento mori, we rage instead at death, block the reaper's entrance, even though potato bins are empty and paper hoarded, and dolphins return to Molo Audace, and skies reclaim their blue. And we laugh at death, block the reaper's entrance, hear a thundering buffalo drum, as dolphins return to Molo Audace, and skies reclaim their blue, now that I am not allowed to touch you. The second poem I'd like to read is one that I wrote for my parents in August of 2020. So what was that, Marcia? About 5 months later. Anyway, salami is your talisman for my parents. The word arises during an Italian lunch of yeasted bread and mortadella we share across the metal screen of your bedroom window. Mask removed, you indoors, me outdoors. Thank God you're on the first floor and not hovering on a second or 13th. You want salami next time. It penetrates your ritual afternoon nap, and you are temporarily healed by this dish with its salt now streaming down face as tears, calling out to your long dead friend Carlo, provider of fermented meats and cheeses and conversations that cure loneliness. And perhaps he is here again with you as you try to rise from bed to greet him, strong in that moment, leg and shoulder unfettered by fracture and fear, warmed by this cold cut made for times of meager portions. You put your face and hands against the window, and I become a palm reader.
It is beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow. Yeah, I remember those hands on windows too often. Our next reader I'm very happy to introduce is Kathleen Powers, PhD. Kathleen is a medical student at UC Irvine School of Medicine. She graduated from the doctoral program in rhetoric at UC Berkeley in 2020. So at some point she's going to be an MD PhD, very impressive. The Cybernetic Origins of Life was the title of her dissertation. Her research has been supported by the Townsend Center for the Humanities at UC Berkeley and the UC Humanities Research Institute. She studies the organism in philosophy of biology. Kathleen?
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you. I'm going to be reading a poem about being a first-year medical student during COVID in the anatomy lab. So as I mentioned, the poem is about anatomy lab, which is a particular experience for a medical student. Anatomy lab is where medical students dissect human cadavers. The poem is called Heart as an Esker, and an esker is a dried out riverbed. So if any of you have been to the high desert and looked out over the plains of Nevada, Arizona, or California, you've likely felt the sense of something massive that you could not grasp, something that came before you, and now you are looking at desert rock that was once a sea. For me, Anatomy Lab had a similar temporality and experiences that, and I will share that with you now. And so the poem is called Heart as an Esker. Part 1. There was once a river where fingers now are, a whole flood, and now we're in it. Part 2. The strange thing about thinking is that it possesses no force. As he held the heart in his hands, the edges kept caving in. I kept putting them back as if to preserve their form would mean something. Part 3. Meaning in an ancient riverbed arrives as the water and sea-foamed life you'd imagined there dissipate. And you're on the banks as you always were, marooned. An observer's status is always a marooned one, not realizing you're in it. That's you, dear, the khakied paleontologist of the Anatomy Lab, enclosed in sedimentary fascia, looking at something else the earth has poured itself over. Part 4. You are both on and beside the table. The carapace is formaldehyde, and you plug a valve with your thumb. The day you zoomed about necrosis, you saw a wall of cinder blocks as a dyke fleshly lane across what used to be the library. You ask the foreman, what? And he replies, labs. Knowledge and life are at odds with each other, but you knew that before seeing forms in the basalt and limestone. You shrug. Aristotle said, like attracts like, and you went out looking for fossils. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. You remind me I should announce something about this time, which is that the 2023 Healing and Hope Symposium feature will be held in next February, and submissions are due in about 2 days. And we particularly would like to see them from people in training. The major theme is the impact of racial remarks and expectations and lies on the caregiving as well as on caregivers. So if you are up to it, send a note to some other people too. We'd love to have you back. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce the next speaker. And it's particularly interesting to me, Jane Hillary, because she's a holistic individual. And I've become very involved in indigenous biology in the last 20 years. Very few people know that, and I'm very impressed by what's happening in the herbal world and where new medicines are being found, and they're going to come to the clinic pretty soon. In reality, they came to the clinic thousands of years ago. Without further ado, Jane Hillary is a graduate of Healing Hands School of Holistic Health. In recent years, she has retired from an eclectic career as an actor, acting teacher, arts administrator, and holistic health practitioner. She has written poetry since the age of 16 and been published in the California Quarterly and in Pop Art, an anthology of Southern California poets. Jane currently credits her family, the natural world, and friends, including the Laguna Poets, as her source of inspiration as she explores collective healing through the honoring of personal freedoms and the heroic journal of the individual. Jane, you're on.
Thank you so much, Frank. Earlier in the chat, I saw that Jim had requested that maybe we'd like to mention poets that we read. So I would just like to do a shout out for a couple of my favorites who write about the spirituality and the natural world. So one is Mary Oliver, and the other is Dr. Gabriela Mioto, who you heard of not very long ago, who is one of my very favorite poets in the whole world. So I'm so happy to see you here today, Gabriela. Makes my heart glad. So one thing that Gabriela has talked about before is the honoring of her patients, and she does write about them. And this first poem that I'm going to read is, I had a meeting with a very wonderful woman who had cancer, and she was also in deep grief at the same time as I met her. So this is a poem for her. Sunset at top of the world for Anna Greta. From high we look down to the quiet water, stretching east-west, grey as a dove's wing. We know a body can fly like a bird, away to the low, dark island, backlit in pink, pale as a shell. Now you speak of the death of your son. Suicide. A body can fly like a bird. So many came, you were amazed. So gentle a soul. God is good, you say. Driving down the mountain, all hell breaks loose. Turquoise like sea glass bursts through the windshield, and clouds, scarlet as flame, flock toward heaven, beating in chorus their glorious wings. And my next poem is also a pantoum called Song for Healing, which I wrote right at the beginning of the pandemic when I was recovering from a surgery. But it seems to really speak to any healing time that we seem to go through more and more, it seems, as we age. Nothing but time, everything's humming, bees around the buds of the bent avocado, drone of a plane in a puff of ether, blue, blue burgeoning sky, bees round the buds of the bent avocado, black wires bejeweled with murmuring birds, blue, so blue, the burgeoning skyway, Om Anandam Namah. Wires bejeweled with murmuring starlings, February sun cradles the teacup, Om Anandam Namah. Blessed this season of regeneration. February sun cradling the teacup, Esperanza breeze through the palm fronds. Blessed this season of regeneration, pain the fume of an ancient rhyme. Esperanza breeze through the palm fronds, brave choirs of angels summoning spring, pain the fume of an archaic rhythm, lost in the thrum of the echoing sky. Choirs of daffodils summoning springtime, drone of a plane in a puff of ether, wires of starlings whirring the mantra, everything's humming, nothing but time. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was incredible. It is my great pleasure to introduce a former colleague of mine, Vautran Invo, MD, another family medicine physician and associate clinical professor at UC Irvine School of Medicine. She practices and teaches broad spectrum family medicine, including outpatient and inpatient care, all genders and age groups, in-office procedures, family planning, prenatal care, labor and delivery, and newborn care. So like any great family doctor, she does it all. She is also the medical director for UCI's student-run free clinic that teaches students and residents community-centered care and volunteerism. Her two children were her inspirations for various creative works, including her poems Late and Post-Call Parent, that were featured in the UCI's annual Medical Arts and Humanities publication, Plexus. So Bautran, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. So the poem I'm reading today will be regarding my experience. It's titled Giving Birth Just Before Lockdown. The timing worked out that I essentially was delivering my baby, went home, and then the next day lockdown happened. So it's immediately, I actually felt lucky because I skipped that whole first few days when during lockdown when no visitor was allowed in the hospital. So we kind of missed just that. So I'll just go on to it. So every day I read the news as I nurse my newborn. Every day I watch the COVID count in our hospital as I receive care for my own wounds. Every day I review our team briefing and call assignment as I clean my mother's tracheotomy tube. Every day I worry about my colleagues in the trenches and their high-risk family as I teach my own high-risk father how to wear a mask. Every day, my wound is healing and I prepare to return to the trenches. The physician in me is ready to gown up and join the fight. The mother and daughter in me are terrified. I can be the solution to helping patients recover, but I can also be the vector and the reason for my family's demise. I'm ready to return, but I'm not ready. Every day, I follow vaccine progress as our COVID census rises, as I see patients in tents, as I see families gather in black on the hospital lawn. I gown up, mask up, wash hands, shower and change before getting home. I worry the milk that I pump for my baby may be contaminated. I worry that my hug could give my child the disease. I live in a mask, even as I sleep, nursing my baby. I try to do the right thing, doubting if I made the right call. I take the vaccine at the first availability. I even take it in my eyeballs if it's the only way. I look to the future with hope as our COVID census dwindles, my heart full of joy as our hospital tent is dismantled. Thank you.
I'm supposed to introduce Dr. Rosen. Now, is he here? Yes, he is. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Well, I'm particularly delighted to introduce Dr. Stephen Rosen. I've known him for 25 years and we've been through many battles and solutions together. But briefly, Steve is a MD, FACP and FACO, who graduated with distinction from Northwestern University Medical Center 6-year honors program and won the Alumni Achievement Award in 1994 and helped greatly in the establishment of the Northwestern University Cancer Center. He is now the Provost, Chief Scientific Officer, and Director of the Comprehensive Cancer Center and the Beckman Research Institute at the City of Hope in Duarte, California. Among the many leadership posts he has held are Director of the Robert H. Lurie Comprehensive Cancer Center at Northwestern University, Editor-in-Chief of Cancer Treatment and Research, Iredell and Manila Cancer Center Director's Distinguished Chair. He has published more than 400 scientific papers, and his poetry has been published in the anthologies Stolen Moments and in Heartfelt Reflections. And I'll just say he's the only cancer center director who's invited me to his house to present poetry. Thank you, Steve.
Franklin. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And in particular, Thelma and Joanna, I want to thank you also for including me in this anthology. I'm going to read the poems you selected. There were 3 written during the early days of COVID. So you'll get a sense it's the early days of COVID. And then I'll read one about my father that also related to COVID, as you'll see. So number 1, an insidious fog blankets the planet, siphoning life from every shrub, aligned with the wind, sand's boundaries, lurking as a shadow filling each sinister crevice. Cryptic origin, absent lucid culmination, we patiently wait, knowing the only certainty is that our love will endure. 2, time has lost its cadence. Days blend without an apparent tomorrow. Oppressive gloom hovers, suffocating joy. Finite or eternal torment. Speculation more concrete than fact. Future, now an obscure journey. And number 3, do we wake from hibernation to a world abandoned by time and disease, searching for answers only to discover questions with lingering doubts of the process, weighing the balance of isolation versus natural bonding, hoping humanity will emerge with limited scars, praying for resolution that leaves the essence of life intact. And then the last poem is called The End, and it'll be self-evident. If I have another chance to say goodbye, it would not be in the ICU. Hopefully time will be my ally. You will find the strength to heal. Let this not be my one great regret. Watching you silently pass in the night, you, more than anyone, deserve to hear I love you one more time. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much, Dr. Rosen.
Thank you.
Very, very touching. It's just what a display of excellence, of wonderful poetic thinking, of great humanity, great compassion, great dedication from all of these people who have read today. Thank you so much for sharing your gifts with us. Thank you for being with us here. Now we have entered, and we are pretty close to our projected schedule for this event, actually. So now we have entered the Q&A with the audience. And we requested at the beginning that all of our listeners out there and people who are here on screen with us right now, that if you have any questions of any particular author, please feel free, raise your hand, make yourself known. We're going to go back into the school mode. I used to be a school teacher, and we'll just call on people as you are raising your hand and wanting to speak, and we'll be very democratic and give everyone a chance. So you can ask a general question about inspiration, about writing discipline, motives, goals, whatever, or you can ask specific questions of a specific poet or essayist as to what they wrote. So let's open it up. And Johanna and Frank, I invite you to add anything to those instructions.
I think that's fine. Maybe the audience can be very wide, and if they wish to ask very personal questions, we're not
Wonderful.
afraid to, particularly if it's related to our poetry.
And again, just anyone who doesn't want to speak but has a thought, yeah, please post it in chat as Dr. Huck just did.
Wonderful.
Cynthia wants to ask something.
Hello, everyone. I will ask a question. So this is Cindy Hawk in Family Medicine. And first and foremost, I would like to thank each of the authors and the organizers for putting this event together. I have to tell you, I was leaving the clinic as this was starting, so I had to join it a bit late. I was listening in my phone, in my car, driving home, and then getting into the house and just sitting down. And then I could see some faces. And it was just such a beautiful healing moment. And there were big clouds, and there was a bit of the rainbow in the sky, and the sun was streaming through. And it had this just wonderful kind of healing feeling that I got from each and every one of you by being able to express the depth of your suffering, and also to acknowledge the compassion for yourselves and each other. So it's just so beautiful, and I think very healing for all of us who are here.
Thank you.
Maybe I could lead to a question of like, given the intensity and difficulties of this moment that we all knew we were facing, we were like was like watching a locomotive, come into a, slow motion accident. We could see what was happening. And yet some of you felt really compelled to write about it. And somehow the writing about it was perhaps therapeutic for you. I'd love to hear what made you want to write about it when it was coming like that.
Poetry is very therapeutic for me. For other people, it's dancing. For other people, it's other aspects of the arts. And because, particularly as a scientist and a physician scientist, you get lost. And the world of poetry has brought me back. I wrote my first poem when I was in junior high school, but not again until high school last year, and then not again until my first year at NIH for a year, and then not again until the year 2000. It is a tremendously engaging, relieving, it's just a very good thing in healing. And that's why we called our symposium Healing and Hope.
Yeah, maybe if I could add something, Frank, to those very wise words. A lot of the authors, and I think everyone who lived through the worst part of the pandemic was really forcibly struck by the isolation that was kind of inflicted on us. And so for me, writing was a way of reconnecting with other people. And sort of like Frank says, it was therapeutic for me to write, even though it didn't change anything in my life. It didn't fix me, it didn't cure anyone, but I felt more in control of an essentially uncontrollable experience.
And poetry allows you to find things in yourself you didn't know existed.
May I say that, and Cynthia, you're a poet yourself, the words that you use, I was just enjoying how you described how you were coming out of the clinic. But this is to pay homage to the over 1 million that died in the US. And as of today, 6.5 million worldwide. And there was so much that we all bottled up, and we are still bottling it in. And I think poetry is a way to encapsulate that feeling on a particular moment or a day. And even though it seems like 2 years past now, we are able to share, encapsulating that moment. And I kind of heard many of the poets of what events happened, and they wrote about it for something like this to share and heal. And I think I did not plan this to be something to read later. It was for that moment to release it from my own self. But I don't know, that's another way to explain it for me.
And I would like to add that a friend of mine who is with the Historical Society in Long Beach asked me as a physician, would I be willing to write something? Because they have records from the 1812 flu. And they want to keep the record at this time. And all of you authors may want to know that this book is now being held at the Historical Society in Long Beach, so that your work will be in their time capsule.
Thank you.
Just unmute yourself whenever you feel like you've got something to say or something to ask. Just feel free. Let's jump right in.
Juliet has something.
I was just going to, I don't know if Dr. Tan Nguyen is still here, but he's been involved in a project with the National Center for Humanities, which is an interviewing project, getting the stories of healthcare workers, not only the doctors and nurses, but the interpreters, the OTs, the housekeepers. And I don't know, Dr. Nguyen, if you are here, if you wanted to say something about that. Sorry, I don't see him any longer. Okay, but there are many projects across the country recognizing that we've all been through something terrible, but something historic, and the importance of trying to preserve that record.
This is Alexandra. I think that sometimes big truths, big statements that we understand arise from little stories. And in fact, these are all of our little stories, and they aren't so little. And when I started writing many years ago. When I started medical school in 1967, I started writing about patients. I didn't want to forget them. And I've kept going throughout all of this time, not really poetry, but it makes me understand that I have not forgotten that person, and I have not forgotten what I learned. And it makes me, puts me at peace. I love to write, and I love to remember the things that I need to remember.
Juliet, you had your hand up. Did you want to?
Elisa?
Unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you. It's a problem of having too many mics. I was listening. This was just such a beautiful evening, and thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and your poetry. Thinking about what Dr. Rajaram said about not imagining reading this at a later time, I was curious as to, you know, how this felt, what this meant to have your poems go beyond the moment that you wrote them for healing, into, you know, in this public venue, to hear them again, to read those words again, sort of what that meant. Did it feel differently, change?
Well, I think public recognition is always part of affecting one's ego, and it may have you look very closely at what you wrote, and there may be things there that you didn't really recognize the first time through. And certainly that has worked for me in terms of relationships with patients or doctors or my own illness. And yeah, for sure.
My own thought was, I was a little nervous about this. So glad you brought that up, Juliet. I was nervous about it because I thought, what will be the mood? Are we going to take everybody back into a deep kind of feeling deep down again? But that's not what I'm getting out of it now. I'm getting a feeling that this has been so healing. And my own journey, 2 years into this, with my daily walks and I've written a lot more poems since then. I'm more in touch with nature, and a lot of it is healing. So I don't think it's an honor for the fact that Thelma and Frank and Joanna picked my poems. So it's an honor. But at the same time, it's only a path. It's only a walk. You're just walking a journey. And this is just a small part of that journey, is what I felt.
Yeah, Elisa Lee has her hand up. Elisa, do you want to unmute? And
Hi, so I'm a UCI student, and my major is journalism. So for our new university paper, I wanted to attend this event to write about it because I was very drawn to poetry and like what you guys have to say. I just want to say thank you so much for you guys. I just want to thank everyone here, like the nurses, the physicians, the doctors, the healthcare workers, because I think that as a student and as someone that's just like 21 that was just at home isolated, the world of COVID and what you've seen like with your patients is something that I've never experienced before. And so this is like my first exposure to, I guess, your guys's perspective and like what you guys have gone through, that I feel like the closest thing I ever seen to what kind of ordeal each of you guys have gone through is like my neighbor who's a nurse, and just like her face and just how much she was like suffering when she had a patient pass away. It makes me very thankful for your guys' service, but also my question is that as you go through life and you know, you meet people that don't have the same occupation, or just people that, you know, like, oh wow, COVID, remember that time, and like joke about it, or just like, oh, this is a story to tell the kids. What do you think of just lives that haven't gone through the same experience as yours, like me? What would you say? And is poetry, I guess, a vessel in which you can share for them to at least understand? Yeah.
Well, sometimes, frequently, because of the empathy and issues related to trust and believing, poetry can open hearts, and therefore people will have emotions mainly. People can make comments like that, but when somebody close, like you just quoted, gets COVID and dies, or has something unexpected, grief can overcome. And that's when your soul gets moved. But it doesn't always happen, because some people my brain has been completely corrupted by lies.
I think Alicia's question is so powerful, you know, very, very relevant. I, for one, would like to hear also, thank you, Frank. And I'd like to hear from maybe Kathleen, Stephen, Pamela, and any others. It's a big question, and I'd like to hear more responses to that.
I think we
Hi,
all
Lisa.
experience. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I will answer after you.
Oh, okay. I think we all experience COVID in our own, unique way. Ironically, as a physician, I'm at City of Hope. It's a cancer hospital. We had a limited number of individuals who were affected by COVID. During the peak, we had a ward, but not to the same level as a medical center. I myself, though, have 300 immunocompromised patients, and I didn't have a single death during COVID, not one. I have many stories to tell. We don't have the time today, including a drug we developed that's generic that we couldn't advance because it is generic, but as effective as any other therapeutic. But I still, now 2.5 years into all of this, am baffled by so much of what happened. And I think at some point we have to, as a society, go back and look at how we've approached this sort of epidemic, pandemic.
Yeah, and Lisa, so I'm a student too. I'm a medical student at UCI, and I think that when I think about the pandemic and being a medical student during the pandemic, I thought a lot about the structure of work in this country. So, who was getting COVID? Well, they were frontline workers like our nurses and doctors, but they were also our bus drivers, the people who bag our groceries, and the essential first line workers who are actually not just in healthcare. So I think I thought a lot about work in general. And then you think about residence work and the work of our physicians. And you think about how our entire society was writing upon the work of medical first line workers and the work of non-medical first line workers. If grocery stores closed, we wouldn't have anything to eat. And when you think about how that labor is compensated, it raises a lot of questions, like things like unions for residents and better hours for doctors. So I think work and art are related, actually. But that's a separate question. But I think I would respond initially with the thought about work and what kind of work caring for others is, and what that looks like in medicine and what that looks like for essential work outside of medicine.
Great.
This is Jim. I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Make an observation.
Pamela, is
Uh,
Pamela waving her hand?
Okay, go ahead.
Go. Just trying to unmute myself. I bring a little bit of an added perspective to this in the fact that I'm a PK, a physician's kid, and my father was a surgeon, and he served in World War II as an army surgeon over in France. And I remember I worked for him. That his working in his office was my first experience in the medical field and helped me to pursue further interest in being in medicine, because I never thought I wanted to be. But I remember the time my children were young and getting vaccinated, and it was right about the time of the anti-vax movement. And I remember my father, I sat down to talk to him about some friends of ours who weren't going to vaccinate their children. And I just remember him pounding his desk and saying, these people have not lived through an epidemic. That, measles, mumps, chickenpox, back in, decades ago. And it's really opened, this reading tonight has really made me feel very close to my father in the fact that we are still in this pandemic, but it's not really ever been the only pandemic. And to find out that this is going to be have a historical significance is very meaningful to me. So I very much appreciate knowing that, our work is going to be in a time capsule for that. And it makes me think I need to go back and start to document even my father's experience, that he never wrote down. So.
Excellent. Jim.
Well, I'm just delighted for this event. I want to thank Thelma, John, and Frank for curating this amazing collection and this assemblage of artists and healers to share with the rest of us. So thank you all. Once again, we have another event this week, so I hope that you'll join us for that if you're interested. Yeah, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful evening. May it be restorative so that we can get up tomorrow and do the good work tomorrow as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
you.
Thank you again, James. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. It
Thank
was
you.
a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.